There have a lot of doubts have been raised about the budget arithmetic in particular. There was so much criticism of Mr. Chidambaram's numbers. Everybody said that 4.1 number looked completely unrealistic. Whereas now most people seem to have bought into it, even though Mr. Jaitley has in fact perhaps cut some direct taxes. So how does it all add up? Does it look credible at all? Or has he lost an opportunity to restore some sanctity to budget numbers?
No, this point is valid. Whether the 4.1% is too low a deficit number, given the kind of expenditure growth which is going to take place, and also the tax concessions, etc., that have been granted, yes, that's an issue, and which would require tremendous action on part of reducing administrative expenditure, I presume, and revenue expenditure in particular, and the complexity of our delivery of services. So yes, that's an issue which needs to be watched and watched carefully. Whether you can stick to that kind of a fiscal deficit number. It doesn't matter whether it is 4.1 or 4.4 or 4.5, but whether you can restrain it to that level, given the kind of expenditure profile that we have outlined in our budget. So yes, that's an issue, certainly. Hello.
So my question really was not so much about the number per se. But my question was not so much about the number per se, but the manner in which the numbers have been arrived at by, rolling over some expenses, booking some revenues in advance. So was this an opportunity for the government, which they cannot have next year, to say that, look, there were many questionable ways of arriving at that fiscal deficit number, whatever the number, and we're going to restore sanctity, we're going to restore integrity to those numbers and reset those numbers, rework those numbers. So was that an opportunity that Mr. Jaitley should have availed of at this particular juncture?
I can't, the time is too short, about a month, so he has done the best job that he could, and I think we have to take it as given. One quarter is, one quarter budget was already there, and now we are in the last 3 quarters. So if the budget needs to be revised, I am sure that he will do it later on in the, later on during the year. But the issue raised by you is an important one, that with so much expenditure increases and some tax concessions, etc., can you speak to the deficit number unless growth picks up? You see, supposing, for example, if the growth goes up to 7% or 6.5% or something like that, then it's feasible. But then the question is that what the nominal GDP would be based on inflation. So these are intricate questions, and I hope that you will keep an eye on them and watch them. And if the budget deficit numbers are out of bound, then you will have to reduce expenditure. There is no doubt about that.
So one of the big means that he has used to raise the kind of money that he wants to raise for his expenditure is disinvestment. The target for disinvestment is really very aggressive, close to 58,000 crores for both disinvestment and offloading a government stake in various companies. Now that's much more than we've done, in the past year, and it's close to what we've achieved in the past 3 years. Now, how easy is it, number one, going to be to achieve that target? And also, is it wise to really use disinvestment as a means of, looking at it as a revenue, almost looking at it as a revenue rather than a means of bridging a gap?
No, but you see, the disinvestment has been talked about for some time, and I think for the government to reduce its own investment and its own control, and to make, this is a larger issue, which is to make the boards of PSUs also more autonomous. There has to be, and this has been discussed at some length among correspondents and so on. So I hope this disinvestment would allow the government also to pursue a hands-off approach. That the ministerial intervention in the functioning of PSUs would decline and should decline in the interest of the country. So let us hope that that works, that the whole governance system of PSUs would undergo a change with disinvestment. And if that happens, then many of our undertakings, many of our PSU undertakings would certainly enjoy a market which you can raise the amount of money that you want to do. So it is a long term, it's an issue that has to be looked into, and it's not only an issue of how much money you float, but at what prices it will be sold in the market, unless we improve governance system, unless we make it more autonomous institutions, and that has been talked about, as you know. So I hope that will happen as part of the disinvestment process.
So if you were to point a finger at the, one overarching theme in the budget, what would that be? Would that be infrastructure? Would that be FDI? Would that be the fiscal consolidation? What do you think is the overarching theme in the budget? Is there one at all? And if so, which is that?
No, fiscal, you see, fiscal consolidation, as you have said earlier, has a question mark. Definitely a question mark. Second, that in terms of expenditure profile, I mean, there are a lot of small expenditure increases in a lot of sectors. And whether the government able to invest that kind of, a small amount, relatively small, not small, but relatively small amounts of increases all across the border, and whether it increases government's power to decide what the PSUs would do. So I'm not, we have to wait and watch. I mean, I would have been happier if he had concentrated on some crucial sectors. For example, both the public delivery and the infrastructure, and that's it. But the canvas has been very, very broad. And that's an issue that we have to watch. And I agree with you that that's a problem, yes.
So on infrastructure, the government has announced a number of measures, particularly given the fact that PPPs haven't worked very well. There's talk of a 3P initiative. There's a talk of a 5x25 way of financing infrastructure projects. There's also talk about, allowing banks to raise long-term funds without having to preempt anything for CRR, SLR. Now, how far will these really help, given the fact that in PPPs, a lot of the problems really have been that you've not been able to get back, private parties are not willing to enter, given the kind of politicization that there is of tolls, of tariffs. Now, does that get addressed with all these things, number one? Number two, the 5x25 means that they've suggested. We've had takeout financing in the past, and that really hasn't worked. So will this 5x25, is that just, old wine in new bottles? What is your take on that?
No. I mean, you see, you have raised a good point about the banking sector. So what they have done in the banking sector, that's a positive movement. The CRR, SLR, etc., if they are not encumbered with more funds being raised by the banks, then it helps. It helps certainly increase the quantity of money that they can be raised. The second point with regard to whether actually the markets can absorb this amount of funds is also feasible, but I think what this would involve is probably giving confidence to the market that the structure and the governance system of PSUs will be changed, and that the money is being used actually for constructive work. So it's an ambitious target, but if behind this target are policy changes which make the government functioning less interventionist in terms of, say, infrastructure. For example, you take the highway authority or the airways or any other ports or something, why not leave the entire power of building, raising money, etc. to the companies with government guarantee? Then it will work. So I believe that a lot of changes in the governance system are needed, and I very much hope that Mr. Jaitley, the finance minister, who has so much experience in the past, both in parliament and also in governance, would introduce these changes which make the public sector more autonomous, which make it possible to raise more funds. There is no reason why it can't be done. As you know, if the private sector, corporate sector can raise the amount of money that they are raising, that some of our best companies can also raise. So it is not the ownership per se which is a problem, but the governance system. And I hope that would improve. And it can be done.
Also, absolutely, it can be done. But the question is, very often in the case of infrastructure projects in particular, the pricing, whether it is power tariffs, whether it is tolls for the roads, it's invariably a political decision. And the governance means that unless you have independent regulators in place, you're never going to have the private sector be assured that it's going to get any return on its investment. So how do you look at the entire scope of regulation in the country? All the regulators we've seen have typically been ex-bureaucrats and very often not particularly independent. So do you see some hope on that front? Because unless that changes, you're never going to get PPPs off the road, as it were.
No, I think you've raised a very, very crucial issue, which is absolutely correct, that we have to change. And this can be done. You see, the bureaucrats, ex-bureaucrats and new bureaucrats, etc., it's all a question of empowerment. I mean, why is it that our country, the same country, which can't give you roads, which can't give you ports on time or construct power plants on time, can give you the largest free and fair elections in human history? Who runs the election commission? Tell me. They are the same ex-officers or ex-bureaucrats. But the Election Commission is a very good example. CVC is an example. CAG is an example. So, it can be done. I mean, it is provided the government stays at arm's length, that it confines itself to making policy, not doing day-to-day intervention in the working of the regulatory authorities. So, it can be done. That's the central point that I want to make to you, that the fact that you are ex-bureaucrat or you have a lot of administrative experience does not preclude the effectiveness of the system that you are governing. And the best illustration of that I have given you is the election, highest, largest, freest elections in human history. If we can do that, why can't we run our roads? You tell me, give me a good reason.
You're absolutely right, so you're bang on. But I was only wondering whether there is a need to institutionalize the mechanism. Right now, it just depends on who is heading the so fortunately, we've been lucky with the Election Commission. But one can't say the same thing about the CBI. Very often, it's accused of being used as government's handmaiden. Similarly, the CERC is also accused of following the diktat from the government. So there are these, whether these are valid or not. The fact remains that the perception is that they're not particularly independent. So should we think in terms of some way of having a mechanism, an institutional mechanism whereby the selection is made by a parliamentary committee, where it's not just the government, because we saw previously there was a huge uproar about the selection of the CVC. So can we institutionalize these mechanisms so that no questions are raised whatsoever about their independence, about their autonomy? Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. It is possible. It is feasible. But whether it will be done, because it will reduce the power of the minister in charge, and they may resist it. But it has to be done. In the educational system, for example, you take one main regulator, the Reserve Bank of India, with which I was associated. It's not there was a consultative process. The government appoints the governor or the deputy governors, and after that it has a certain amount of autonomy in deciding what the interest rate should be, what the monetary policy should be. Government is always under consultation, and if you are undergoing a problem which is of a financial nature and a crisis or something, then government is a part of that policy discussion. But once the policy has been decided, then the implementation, execution is entirely within the hands of the regulatory authority, which in this particular case that I am mentioning is the Reserve Bank of India. Can be done. But you have to keep,
absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. It can be done provided there's a will. Absolutely, absolutely, sir. You spoke about the Reserve Bank of India, sir. One surprising mention. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please carry on.
No, sorry. Yeah, please continue. Yeah, you continue.
No, please. No. So you talked about the Reserve Bank of India, and one surprising mention in the budget document this time, which one doesn't normally see, is that the Finance Minister also talked about a new budgetary framework for the Reserve Bank of India. What do you think he was talking about? Does that suggest the government is inclined to move towards inflation targeting at a time when the whole world is now realizing the limits of inflation targeting?
I hope, I mean, this is a very, sensitive issue that you have raised, and as having been involved with the Reserve Bank, I should not be commenting that in a direct way, but I don't believe in inflation targeting. I have said so in public, I have said so in conferences, that inflation targeting is not something that we should introduce as a policy measure. And the rest of the world also has decided. You take at the US or Euro or something, the inflation is it supposed to be 1%, 1.5%? They keep on revising it, and that is the role of the monetary authority. So what I am saying is that don't set a target, and that we can. The Reserve Bank of India, for example, tells you what the money supply increase is likely to be, what the growth of credit is likely to be, and let it be that way. So inflation targeting is not correct, because if you have a drought this year, how will you control inflation, tell me, in the food prices? Then you have to restrict credit in the rest of the sector, which would impede investments, growth, infrastructure. How does it help? When in our country, the problem is even what you might say, more intense because of the importance of food prices and import of oils. How do you regulate that price? Is the point clear?
Absolutely, sir. I couldn't agree with you more, but when it comes from you, Absolutely. So I couldn't agree with you more. But when it comes from you as a former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, who's been there, seen it, done it, as it were, it carries much, much more weight. I also wanted to ask you about subsidies. Are you a little disappointed, or did you expect that the government would not be in a position to announce any kind of a roadmap of phasing out subsidies, particularly oil subsidies?
No, I think that has to be done. But it's too early, you know, in the sense that you have, the present government has been in office for a month. And if you have to formulate the budget the way you have done, and there are certain things which need to be done, then it requires a certain amount of time. And hopefully that over a period of time that they would decide to reduce the amount of subsidy. I mean, you have 100 subsidy schemes, for example. In what way we can economize without hurting the very poor? That is the essential part. I mean, take the PDS, public distribution system for food grains. Is it, I mean, you spend 1 rupee that you pass on to the below poverty line people, and you spend 3 rupees 35 paise to pass it on. That is 2 rupees 35 paise goes in the administrative mechanism. Why? This is not my estimate, this is Planning Commission estimate. So you can certainly reduce subsidies without hurting the interests of the poor or the public service provision, provided you sort of simplify the administrative system. And there the cash transfer scheme, which the budget has also talked about, is extremely important. Let's do it. And you would see how much you can do by way of what you call subsidization. And it is not, we should not use the word subsidization. The most important thing is poverty alleviation. Why is it that one of the fastest growing countries also has the incidence of poverty, which is highest in the world? Tell me. So there must be some problem in the governance, in the kind of things that we do and spend on.
Certainly, sir, you're bang right on that. But we're running out of time. But before we let you go, one last question. Do you think the budget was a forum where the government could have announced some second-generation reforms? And the absence of that suggests that the government either didn't have time, or that second-generation reforms, labour reforms, judicial reforms are just too difficult, and the government perhaps does not wish to tackle them right now, in any case?
No, time is important. I mean, for example, if you want to do labour reforms, or if you want to do any major reform, then it requires discussion and consultation with the authorities which are likely to be affected. And therefore, I think that that particular point you have to keep in mind. I am not saying that they would have done it if they had the time. I mean, we have had previous government which had the time but didn't do it, because these are complex issues, these are non-popular issues and require time. But in this particular case, I mean, I would say that even if you wanted to do it, you didn't have the time to do it. But that doesn't mean that I can say for sure that this was something they had in mind. So do you see the point? I mean, that some of these basic reforms that you talked about in labour area or some other areas require a certain amount of exchange, of a dialogue with the affected parties. And there they didn't have the time.
Yeah, certainly. So one can't expect such dramatic changes overnight. Thank you so much, Dr. Yes, of course, Dr. Jalan. One really cannot expect dramatic changes overnight. They've been with us for a very long time. Thank you so much, Dr. Jalan. It's been great having you.